Camille Watkins was 40 years old when she decided to forgive her husband for the one thing she had told herself she never would. She was not the kind of woman people expected to forgive easily. She drove a 2011 Nissan she had bought used from a lot in East Charlotte. She wore her hair natural and pulled back most mornings. No products. No fanfare. She brought her own lunch to the office in a blue container with a lid that snapped too loudly, which her coworkers had commented on exactly once before they learned not to. She had a modest salary listed on her tax returns and a joint checking account that her husband Marcus used for gas and groceries. And as far as Marcus was aware, that was the full picture of what she had. He had come to her 8 weeks earlier with red eyes and a rehearsed speech and a story about a woman named Vanessa who worked in his building, and he had said it was a mistake. It was over. It would never happen again. He had said he was sorry in the particular way men said sorry when they believed their regret was the most important thing in the room. Camille had not said much. She never did. She had asked him to sleep in the guest room while she thought. She thought for 6 weeks. She had concluded, quietly and without drama, that she was willing to try, that the marriage was worth the effort of trying. She told him on a Sunday evening over dinner she had cooked herself. She said she was willing to move forward. She said she needed honesty from this point, and she needed time. He said thank you. He reached across the table and took her hand. His eyes were warm and his voice was low, and she looked at his face, and she believed him. She stopped believing him 47 minutes later, standing in the hallway outside the guest room he still slept in, holding a glass of water she had poured for herself, listening through the door he had not fully closed. He was on the phone. His voice was low and familiar. He said, "It worked." He said, "I told you she would fold." He said, "Give it 2 more weeks and she will stop watching everything." Camille stood in that hallway, and she did not move, and she did not make a sound. What Marcus did not know, what Vanessa did not know, what none of the people in that room at dinner or any room in that house had ever known, was what Camille had spent 14 years building under her own name before Marcus ever said her last one out loud. $316,000 was the figure her attorney would later attach to the damages portion of the filing. That was only the beginning. He had played the long game from a seat he did not understand, was not his. What happened when Camille Watkins stopped forgiving and started building was something Marcus had spent his entire marriage standing too close to notice. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the kitchen window the way Camille had planned it when she redesigned the space 4 years earlier, working from her own hand-drawn elevations on graph paper, repositioning the window 6 inches to the east so the light would fall across the countertop at the angle she wanted in the early hours. She was a logistics architect by profession, which meant she spent her working life designing the invisible systems that made large things move without friction, but the principles were the same everywhere she applied them. You studied the environment. You identified where the inefficiencies were. You rebuilt from the inside out. She had her coffee at the kitchen counter that Tuesday morning, the day after the Sunday dinner, 2 mornings after she had stood in the hallway with her glass of water and listened to the man she had just agreed to forgive tell someone on the other end of a phone that it had worked. The kitchen was the room she had lived in most honestly over the course of this marriage. She had picked every surface herself. The countertop was a slab of quartzite she had sourced from a stone yard 40 minutes outside Charlotte and arranged to have cut to her specification. The backsplash was a running bond of handmade ceramic tile in a color the maker called river clay, which was the color her grandfather's hands had been, the color of honest work. She had set the tile herself on a long weekend, Kneeling on the floor, she had also refinished, working row by row with the patience that came naturally to people who understood that precision done slowly cost less than errors corrected later. Marcus had stood in the doorway that weekend and watched her for a while and said she didn't have to do that. They could hire someone. She had said she preferred to do it herself. He had not understood why, and she had not explained, because the reason was not the kind of thing that translated easily to someone who had never built anything with their hands. She had not slept well the night before. She had not told Marcus that. She had cooked breakfast and set his plate at the table and poured his coffee and asked about his week, and he had answered in the warm, easy way he had used since Sunday evening, the manner of a man who believed he was now operating on secured ground. She had watched his hands. She had watched his eyes. She had noted the small delays between her questions and his answers, the half-second of calculation behind the warmth. She had spent her career identifying the gaps between stated capacity and actual performance. She knew what a system looked like when it was running under false parameters. Her father, a man named Eugene Watkins, who had driven long-haul freight for 30 years out of Charlotte before his knees gave out, and had died on a Thursday morning when Camille was 27, had told her once that the most important thing about a long road was knowing the difference between a detour and a dead end. He said a detour cost you time. A dead end cost you everything if you didn't turn around soon enough. She had thought about that the night she stood in the hallway. She had thought about it again over breakfast. She had watched Marcus eat and smile, and she had thought, this is not a detour. She and Marcus had met at a logistics conference in Nashville 11 years earlier. He was in sales for a mid-sized freight company. She was presenting a paper on supply chain restructuring that had been accepted without her knowing anyone on the review committee, which was the way she preferred to enter rooms. He had found her afterward at the networking reception and said her presentation was the best thing he had heard all week. She had thanked him and asked what specifically he meant, because she did not accept compliments that couldn't be supported. He had laughed at that. He had answered with 3 specific points. She had stayed to talk for 2 more hours. They were married 18 months later in a small ceremony in Charlotte. Her uncle Philip walked her down the aisle. Her father had been gone 4 years by then, and she had felt his absence the way you felt the absence of a load-bearing wall after it was removed, structurally, in the way everything else shifted slightly. The first year was good. The second year was good. By the 4th year, something had changed in Marcus that she could not name but could measure. The way you could measure settlement in a foundation before you could see the crack. Small things. The phone turned away. The explanations that arrived before the questions. The gap between what he said and what his eyes did. She had not confronted him. She had watched. She had planted a small voice-activated recorder in the ceramic pot on the hallway shelf outside the guest room the morning after she heard the phone call. She had owned the device for 2 years. She had purchased it after a colleague described a contract dispute that turned on a recorded conversation, and she had filed it in the cabinet above her desk at home, the way she filed most things she thought might one day be useful. She was a woman who believed in preparation. Her father had believed in it too. He said the road didn't care about your intentions. The road only responded to what you had with you when things went wrong. She let 2 days pass before she checked the recorder. The first recording was 40 seconds long. It was Marcus on a call saying that the situation was handled and that she had believed every word and that they were back on schedule. Back on schedule. She replayed that phrase 3 times. The second recording was from the following morning. 4 minutes. Vanessa's voice on speaker, audible enough to transcribe. Vanessa said she was tired of waiting. Marcus said it wouldn't be long. Vanessa asked about the accounts. Marcus said he had been moving things slowly enough that nothing had flagged. He said the joint account was not the account that mattered, and that Camille had never looked past it. Camille sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a notepad beside it, and she listened to all 4 minutes without moving. Then she opened the account portal for the investment account she had maintained in her own name for 9 years. The account, Marcus had been told, held a modest retirement balance. It held considerably more than that. She verified the balance. She verified the access logs. He had never attempted to view it. He did not know the institution's name. She opened a second portal. A third. She wrote 4 numbers on the notepad in a column and added them together. Then she picked up the phone and called her attorney. Her hands did not shake. Preparation was the work. The crisis was just the moment it paid off. Claudette Osei had been Camille's attorney for 7 years, handling the legal architecture of the LLCs and the real estate holdings and the contract reviews that accompanied the consulting work Camille did outside her regular employment. Claudette was a small woman with reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain and the manner of someone who had heard most of what human beings were capable of and had stopped being surprised by any of it. She arrived at Camille's kitchen table on a Wednesday morning with a yellow legal pad and a leather bag that contained, as Camille would learn, everything she needed. Camille placed the recorder on the table. She placed the notepad with the 4 numbers. She placed a printed log of every transfer she had traced from the joint account over the preceding 14 months, which she had completed the night before, cross-referenced against the date stamps on the recordings. 14 months, $41,000 moved incrementally from the joint account into a personal account Camille had discovered by searching the routing numbers in the transfer logs, an account she had not known existed before Tuesday night. She had not known because she had not been looking. She had been building things in another direction entirely. Claudette reviewed the documents without speaking. She listened to both recordings. She made notes in a handwriting so small Camille could not read it from across the table. Then she said the recordings were admissible in North Carolina under its one-party consent statute. She said the account transfers constituted dissipation of marital assets under state law. She said she wanted to bring in a forensic accountant named Gerald Pitt to trace the full transfer history and document the pattern formally. She said one more thing. She said she wanted to know whether Camille had any reason to believe Vanessa was also involved in the financial activity beyond the phone call. Camille said she had found one transfer to a payment platform that corresponded to a date 3 days before Vanessa's name first appeared in the phone records she had pulled from the carrier account she managed. She had a screenshot. Claudette looked at her over the reading glasses for a moment. She said, "You already pulled the phone records." Camille said she was on the account as the primary holder. She had pulled them the same night she pulled the transfer logs. Claudette wrote something on the legal pad and underlined it twice. She said she would file within 10 days. She said Camille should continue to behave normally at home until the service date. Camille said she could do that. She had been behaving normally for 14 months without knowing she had reason not to. She drove directly from Claudette's office to the house on the west side of Charlotte, where her Uncle Philip lived in the house he had owned since before Camille was born. Philip Watkins was 68 years old, a retired electrician with large, steady hands and the habit of sitting on his front porch in the early afternoon, regardless of weather, which was where Camille found him. She sat in the chair beside him and told him what she had heard and what she had found. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he said something her father used to say. He said, "The people who think they know the whole of you are always the most surprised at the end." He said Marcus had been calling him for the last 3 weeks. He said the calls were friendly, checking in, the way a man called when he was trying to confirm that his flanks were secured. Philip said he had not mentioned the calls to Camille because he had not known what they meant at the time. He said he understood now. Camille asked what Marcus had asked about on the calls. Philip said he had asked about Camille's family, whether there was money on her side that he didn't know about, whether her father had left anything significant. Camille sat with that for a moment. She said, "What did you tell him?" Philip said he had told Marcus that Eugene Watkins died, owing 2 months of rent and a truck payment, which was the God's honest truth of what her father had left behind in terms of visible assets. He had not mentioned the insurance policy Eugene had taken out when Camille was 12, the one that matured when she turned 25. The one she had used as the seed capital for the first LLC, because Marcus had never asked about that specifically, and Philip was a man who answered what was asked, and nothing more. Camille looked out at the street. She drove home and made dinner. She set the table the way she always set it, cloth napkins, the good water glasses, the ones Marcus had always noted as evidence that she cared about how things looked even on ordinary nights. She made the meal he had requested twice that week. She asked about his day. He talked for 20 minutes about a project at his firm, and a colleague who had frustrated him, and a lunch he had enjoyed. And she listened with the full appearance of attention, which was a skill she had developed young, the ability to be present on the surface while moving in an entirely different direction underneath. It was, she had realized in the years since she named it, the same skill that made her exceptional at her work. You watched the system. You let it run. You did not interrupt a process that was still producing information you needed. The detail that would matter most had already been planted 2 years before any of this began, in the form of a small wireless network management account she had set up when she installed the home router, selecting the option to receive a monthly device activity report to her personal email address, because she liked to know what was connecting to her network. She had never imagined she would need that information. She had set it up because she was the kind of person who set things up completely, or not at all. Her father had been that way too. He said a half-built thing was just a hazard with ambition. The rest of her was already standing in the finished space of what came next. The detail she had planted without knowing she was planting it was the wireless router log she had been receiving by email every month for 3 years, a setting she had turned on when she set up the home network, because she liked to know what was connecting to what. She had never read the logs carefully. She had read them the night she found the recorder and discovered that Marcus had connected a device to the network 41 times, from a model number she did not recognize as any device she owned. The device had connected on the same evenings, at the same hour, for 11 months. Gerald Pitt identified the device as a secondary mobile unit. He found 4 accounts associated with the activity logged from that unit. One of those accounts had received $41,000 in transfers from the joint account. A second had received $19,500 from an account Camille traced to a company Marcus had registered in his own name without telling her. A company that had no employees and no product, and had invoiced 3 clients she would eventually learn were Vanessa's family members. The total, fully documented and submitted with a petition, was $316,000 counted across 19 months of activity, including the secondary company. The reckoning happened at Claudette's office on a Friday afternoon. Marcus arrived expecting a mediation. He had been told by his own attorney, a man named Howard, who practiced out of a strip mall in North Charlotte, and who had been given the minimum information available, that this was a preliminary settlement conversation. He was not prepared for what was in the room. Camille sat on one side of the conference table with Claudette and Gerald Pitt, and a second attorney from Claudette's firm named Adeazi, who handled the forensic financial matters, and who had brought a second binder. Marcus sat down and looked at the people across the table, and then looked at Camille. He adjusted the practiced ease he always wore into a room and said it was good they could all be here together. Claudette placed the first document in front of him. It was the forensic accounting summary, 19 pages. Gerald had numbered them individually and initialed each one. She placed the second document, the transfer log. She placed the third document, the phone records. She placed the fourth document, the recorder transcript, certified. She placed the fifth document, the router logs with the device model identification. She placed the sixth, an asset disclosure that named each of the accounts in the company Marcus had registered and the total figure, $316,000. Marcus looked at the documents. He did not touch them. His attorney Howard leaned over and began reading. He read for 2 minutes without speaking. Then, he set the pages down. Marcus looked at Camille. His voice was steady. He said he thought they had agreed to move forward. He said she had told him she forgave him. He said he didn't understand what this was. Camille looked back at him. She said, "I was ready to forgive you for what I thought you had done. What you actually did is something else entirely." She said it quietly. She said it the way her father used to state the dimensions of a load, matter of fact, without drama, because the number was the number regardless of how you felt about it. Marcus said she was overreacting. He said a lot of this could be explained. He said she was not seeing the full picture and that if they could just talk privately, without the attorneys, she would understand. Claudette said they would not be meeting privately. Marcus turned to Howard. Howard said nothing. Marcus tried one more thing. He said Camille had accounts he didn't know about. He said there was hidden money on her side, too. He said if she wanted to go through everything, they could go through everything. Claudette slid a seventh document across the table. It was a full asset disclosure for Camille's holdings, prepared voluntarily, listing each account and entity by name and value. Total disclosed assets, just under $4 million. Accumulated over 14 years in Camille's name, maintained in accounts Marcus had never been given access to and had never thought to ask about. Howard read the disclosure. He set it down. He looked at his client. Marcus looked at the number. He looked at Camille. The ease he had worn since he sat down left his face in stages, like a load-bearing element failing quietly from the inside. Camille stood. She gathered the copy of the disclosure Claudette had set aside for her. She picked up her work bag, the blue bag with the loud snapping lid, the bag that had sat on the desk of every office she had worked in for 12 years. She said one more thing before she walked out. She said, "You spent 14 months trying to take from a woman you never took the time to know. That is a very expensive way to learn who someone is." She walked out of the conference room and down the hallway and through the glass front door of Claudette's building and into the October afternoon. She did not look back. 10 months later, Camille Watkins lived in a renovated end-unit townhouse 2 miles from her Uncle Philip's house, a property she had purchased in cash from a seller who was grateful for a quick close and no contingencies. She had taken 3 weeks off work after the divorce was finalized and used the time to refinish the hardwood floors herself, working room by room, sanding and staining in the particular methodical way she approached all physical work, which was to say she started at the far end and moved toward the exit, so she was never painting herself into a corner. She had a small porch off the kitchen where she kept a rosemary plant in a terracotta pot and 2 chairs she had found at an estate sale and stripped and restained over a weekend. On Thursday mornings she sat on that porch with her coffee before work and watched the neighborhood come awake. A man named Lawrence had taken to joining her some Thursday mornings. He lived 2 doors down and worked in urban planning for the city, and had knocked on her door one evening to ask a question about the fence line, and stayed to talk for an hour about infrastructure theory, which was not a topic most people stayed to discuss voluntarily. He was patient and precise, and he laughed when something was genuinely funny rather than when he thought she needed him to. She had not asked for any of that. She had simply noticed it, the way she noticed things that worked without requiring adjustment. Marcus had resigned from his firm before the divorce was finalized, ahead of a compliance review that had been triggered by documentation Claudette had submitted to the state licensing board regarding the shell company and its invoicing activity. He was living in a studio apartment in a suburb outside Charlotte. He had contested the asset disclosure in mediation and lost. Howard had withdrawn from the case 2 weeks before the final settlement was signed, citing a scheduling conflict that Claudette had noted in her file without comment. Vanessa had left the city. Camille heard this from a woman in their shared professional network, who mentioned it the way people mention things they assumed required no explanation. Camille had said thank you and moved on to the next item on the agenda. She noted these things the way she noted resolved inefficiencies in a system. She registered them. She filed them. She did not return to them. On a Thursday morning in October, 10 months and 4 days after she had stood in the hallway with a glass of water and learned what kind of man she had married, Camille sat on her porch with her coffee and watched the light come across the neighbor's rooftop and turn the morning slowly from gray to gold. Lawrence knocked at 7:15 with 2 cups from the shop on the corner, which he had started doing without being asked, which was the kind of thing she had decided she was willing to receive without overthinking. She handed him the second chair. They sat together and watched the morning arrive, and neither of them needed to fill the quiet, because the quiet was already full. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. She had other things to build. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.